the draft Mesothelioma Lump Sum Payments, Conditions and Amounts Amendment Regulations 2025.
Is it the wish of the committee that the instruments be debated together?
Aye.
There being no objection to that, I will now call the Minister to move the first motion and speak to both instruments. At the end of the debate, I will put the motion on the question on the first motion and then ask the Minister to move the second motion formally. I call the Minister to move the first motion.
Thank you very much, Sir Jeremy. I'm delighted to be serving under your chairmanship this afternoon for the first time. And I beg to move that the committee has considered the draft Pneumoconiosis, etc. Workers' Compensation Payment of Claims Amendment Regulations 2025 and the draft Mesothelioma Lump Sum Payments, Conditions and Amounts Amendment Regulations 2025. The debate, Sir Jeremy, which happens every year, gives us a good opportunity to consider not only the uprating instruments, but the wider topic of dust-related diseases that are covered by these schemes as well, and to consider the impact that these diseases have on sufferers and on their families. The instruments are to increase the value of one-off lump sum payments made under two no-fault compensation schemes administered by the Department for Work and Pensions. The two schemes are the Pneumoconiosis, etc. Workers' Compensation Act 1979, which I shall refer to as the 1979 Act scheme. It's a little bit easier to do. And the 2008 Diffuse Mesothelioma scheme, which I shall refer to as the 2008 Act scheme. There isn't a statutory requirement to increase these rates in line with prices each year, but I'm following the approach of previous governments, a very long established approach, and these instruments are increasing the value of the awards by 1.7% in line with the Consumer Price Index of last September. And the new rates will apply to those who first become entitled to a payment from the 1st of April this year. The increase will, as previously, be in line with the proposed increases to industrial injuries disablement benefit, alongside uprating for all the main working age benefits in the coming year. Let me just say a little bit of the background to these two schemes. The 1979 Act scheme provides a single lump sum compensation payment to eligible people with the diseases covered by the scheme, which include pneumoconiosis, disease associated particularly with coal mining, and diffuse mesothelioma caused by exposure to asbestos fibres. The schemes cover people unable to claim damages from an employer, for example, because the employer's out of business, and who have not brought any action against another party for damages. To be eligible for a lump sum award, a claimant must be awarded industrial injuries disablement benefit, IIDB, for a disease covered by the 1979 Act scheme, or would be awarded IIDB, but for their low percentage disablement, because to have actual payment of IIDB, you have to have been assessed as having at least 14% disablement. But if you're less than that, you can still be eligible for one of these payments. The 2008 Act scheme was introduced to provide compensation to people diagnosed with diffuse mesothelioma who are unable to claim compensation under the 1979 Act. That could be because they were self-employed at the time, or because their exposure to asbestos was not at work. So the 2008 scheme filled in a bit of a gap in the former provision. It provides no-fault support to sufferers of diffuse mesothelioma quickly, at a point when their need is typically quite pressing. To recognise the terrible suffering these diseases can bring to whole families, claims can be made to either scheme by a dependent if the person with the disease dies before being able to make a claim. They're both very important schemes. Between April 2023 and March 2024, the latest financial year for which data is available, there were 1,620 awards under the 1979 Act scheme, 320 under the 2008 Act scheme, so nearly 2,000 between them both. Expenditure on lump sum awards under both schemes totalled £30 million in 2023 to 24. Timely financial support through these schemes follows a diagnosis, and it's very important, but we do also need to ensure that fewer people succumb to these awful diseases in the future. The Health and Safety Executive, which reports to my department, has a very important role here, enabling employers to act to prevent and reduce the most common causes of work-related ill health. Exposure to asbestos remains the largest single cause of work-related deaths in the UK, of the order, I think, of about 5,000 deaths per year. The Working Pensions Select Committee published an important report on the Health and Safety Executive's approach to asbestos management 3 years ago, and the department is currently having another look at the recommendations that were in that report. Following the asbestos awareness campaigns of previous decades, HSE makes a wide range of information available on its website, and in January last year HSE launched a duty to manage communications campaign which was called Asbestos Your Duty, to raise awareness and understanding of the legal obligation to share information on asbestos in any workplace to those who might disturb it. There's particular concern about the presence of asbestos in schools. There is a lot of asbestos in many, many schools across the country, and there has been a growing number of retired school teachers among those succumbing to mesothelioma. It is a very serious concern. Department for Education expects all local authorities, governing bodies, academy trusts to have robust plans in place to manage asbestos in school buildings effectively, in line with their legal duties, drawing on appropriate professional advice. But the department is also increasing investment in the next financial year to improve the condition of school buildings, lifting total investment to £2.1 billion, and that's on top of the continuing school rebuilding programme, which is replacing or refurbishing buildings in the poorest condition at over 500 schools. So Jeremy, I'm confident everybody will join me in recognising the continuing importance of the compensation offered by these two schemes. I am required to confirm, and gladly do so, that these provisions are compatible with the European Convention on Human Rights, and I commend the increases to the payment rates under these two schemes and ask the committee's approval to implement them.
Grateful to the Minister. So the question is that the committee has considered the draft mesothelioma lump sum payments, brackets, conditions and amounts, brackets, amendment, regulations 2025, and I call the Shadow Minister, Harriet Cross.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I thank the Minister for bringing forward these regulations. The opposition, we welcome the annual uplifting and operating of the measures for both the mesothelioma lump sum payments and the Pneumoconiosis, which isn't very easy to say over cold, work pensions at payments across England, Scotland and Wales, a position that the Conservative governments have taken in the past with such measures. These regulations provide a 1.7% increase in compensation payments in line with September 2024 CPI inflation rate, and we are pleased to see this commitment to maintaining their real terms value. Mesothelioma in particular is a cruel and indiscriminate disease with symptoms that can take decades to appear, with known links to asbestos exposure. By the time many individuals receive a diagnosis, the condition is already advanced, leaving them and their families with little time to prepare. Over 2,700 people are diagnosed with mesothelioma each year in the UK, and with most cases being diagnosed in people over 75, and with men more commonly affected than women. And pneumoconiosis too remains a serious occupational disease, often affecting those in heavy industry, including coal mining, quarrying and foundries. Given the long latency period for these conditions, many sufferers find themselves unable to pursue civil claims against former employers, making these government schemes a crucial safety net. The compensation framework must remain fair, efficient and responsive to inflationary pressures. I'd be grateful if the Minister could confirm the following, either now or in writing. Firstly, how many individuals are expected to receive these payments in the next 1, 5 and 10 years? I note the 1940 figure for 2023-2024, which was outlined. What is the expected average payment to be received by the recipients? And given the number of cases linked to historic workplace conditions, it would be helpful to understand the government's latest estimate to the long-term costs of these schemes to the public purse. And finally, and I do appreciate that the Minister did touch on this, but if there's any further explanation, that would be helpful. While financial compensation is important, prevention obviously remains paramount. So besides the work of the Department of Education and the DWP alongside the HSE, any further lines of which future cases could be prevented or revealed earlier so we can have a full sight of these would be very helpful. While there remains no statutory requirement for these payments to be uprated, we on this side welcome the fact the government has chosen to do so, as we have in the past. So the opposition will support both the technical aspects and the policy intentions of these regulations and welcomes its implementation. Thank you, Sir Jerry.
I'm also grateful to the Shadow Minister, and I call Steve Darling, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I would just concur with my colleague to my right, in more ways than one, shared just now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Grateful also to the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Minister.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy, and I'm grateful for the support across the committee for these measures. Let me have a go at answering the questions that the Shadow Minister has raised. I don't think we have any better estimate for the numbers in the coming year than the ones I gave for the previous year. I mean, I think it is likely that the numbers over time will decrease. It is 25, 26 years now since the use of asbestos in new buildings was banned in the UK. It was actually quite a tough fight to deliver that in 1999. The Canadian government strongly resisted because they were the source of where the asbestos largely was coming from. But it was interesting that we banned it in the UK, and then it was banned right across the West very, very quickly after that. So there is perhaps a downwards trend. It's not entirely clear. I mean, the 5,000 a year figure that I quoted for fatalities, deaths from asbestos-related diseases, has been at that kind of level for quite a long time, but the expectation is it will fall. On the other side, the pneumoconiosis side, I think that's probably more flat, but it may well be we've got fuller information on that, and if we have, I'll be very pleased to drop the Shadow Minister a line and copy that to other members of the committee. The average amount, doing a quick calculation, it comes to £15,000, I think, roughly speaking. Roughly 2,000 people, 30 million in total, and that's the kind of figure that I would expect to be maintained. In terms of the long-term costs of the scheme, I would expect, in line with what I was saying earlier, it will generally decline. And actually, if you look at the numbers that there are in each year, it has tended to drift downwards, and the expectation is that will continue. On what are we doing about prevention? I'm very concerned about this. I think that it is asbestos in particular is something we need to be taking very seriously. There's a lot of asbestos still in schools. There's a lot of asbestos still in hospitals. And so it's not only retired teachers that we're seeing in the fatality statistics nowadays, but retired medics, nurses, as well. The Select Committee, in its report 3 years ago, recommended that a deadline should be set for the government to ensure the removal of all asbestos from UK workplaces, and suggested that a target of 40 years ought to be announced for doing that, because we do have an enormous amount of asbestos in the UK. I think we've got more per head than any other country. Now, that's not something that has been adopted, but I am, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, talking to the Health and Safety Executive at the moment about what more might be done in this area, and I'm hoping we'll be able to say something about that very soon. But I do welcome the support and the interest across the House in these schemes. They are very important, and as the Channel Minister pointed out, these regulations will ensure that the payments maintain their value. There is, of course, other help available to people with these diseases, industrial injuries, disablement benefit I have talked about, and of course universal credit, new style employment support allowance as well. The Department of Health and Social Care is taking these matters very seriously. NHS England has 13 respiratory clinical networks across the country, and the NHS will be investing in more and better rehabilitation services for patients with respiratory diseases in its long-term plan. Research is very important. The National Institute for Health and Care Research, through its Leicester Biomedical Research Centre, has a long-standing programme of research to develop treatments for mesothelioma, and that's including looking at personalised treatment pathways to identify which patients are likely to get the greatest benefit from differing types of drug therapies. So I'll drop the Shadow Minister and members of the committee a line with the additional data that she was asking for. But Sir Jeremy, I commend the amendments to these schemes to the committee, and I hope the committee will approve the implementation of them. I beg to move.
Thank you. So the question is that the committee has considered the draft mesothelioma lump sum payments, brackets, conditions and amounts, brackets, amendment, regulations 2025. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
The draft pneumoconiosis, etc., workers' compensation, payment of claims, amendment, regulations 2025.
Minister to move formally.
Move formally.
So the question is that the committee has considered the draft pneumoconiosis, etc., workers' compensation, brackets, payment of claims, brackets, amendment, regulations 2025. As many are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.